not people, a belief that its practitioners blindly follow the rites of scientific method to grind out a plethora of uninteresting facts. In spite of all this, I am going to maintain that there is a quality of loveliness in the content and in the devices of physics, that it is a beautiful creation which has meaning for man's view of himself and his place in this world, and that these qualities of physics can appropriately be discussed under the rubric of humanness. And so with that said, I would like to begin with some questions addressed to our panelists. And again, my hope is that you'll converse with each other and with the audience, that we'll have some good back and forth, and we'll go from there. Yes, question in the front row.
So about a year ago, I was talking to one of your professors up at UCSC, and I was saying that any of the physics professors actually do theoretical physics, and he said no. He said it's, okay, one of your people, he said it's all done by mathematicians. You know, and saying that was interesting, done by mathematicians. Do mathematicians understand what they're doing? Do they have any intuitive feeling for it? He says absolutely not. It's absolutely a logic problem. So my question is that seems to be the most inhuman, way of looking at things. So I guess I don't understand how you square that with the second statement about how physics, tells you something about what it means to be human.
Panelists, would you like to grab the mic?
Oh. Well, first of all, there are a lot of theoretical physicists at UC Santa Cruz, and they are not mathematicians.
Okay.
And the first thing I guess I'd like to distinguish is that a mathematician does see the world a bit more black and white. A physicist then applies mathematical reasoning to the universe, including people, and it does bring it home to physical reality. A mathematician is far, far, far abstracted. I mean, if you want to study, for example, the wood in this table, you could break it up into an atom, you could break it up smaller and smaller. Math goes the other direction. It says, what are the classes of all tables? What are it abstracts and it makes things so simple that they're hard to understand. And I guess as a physicist, what we do is take that abstract idea and say, well, where do we see those ideas in nature, and what does that mean for our universe?
I should have told you I was talking to him about string theory.
Okay.
If you want to address that specifically.
Well, there are no string theorists. Well, there is one string theorist at UC Santa Cruz, Michael Dine, and one of the most well-known string theorists in the world, actually. So whoever told you that was misled.
Okay.
And he is not a mathematician, but he uses the tools of mathematics clearly.
Okay, so does Dine's with string theory ever say that he has any intuitive feel for how it works?
String theory is, in some sense, something of the future. It's not super well understood, and it is less connected with everyday reality. It's more of a invention to solve big universal questions like cosmology, like edges of the universe, things beyond everyday physics. So it's an outlier in that sense, and maybe that's enough for your question.
Thank you, Zerby. So we'll begin with a few questions of my own. And so to start, in collaborations between artists and scientists, the payoff for the artists may seem more obvious. Clearly, we're looking at beautiful pieces of art. So my question to you is, does science benefit from this? What is it? What's in it for the physicists, the participating physicists and scientists? What was in it for you, Arturo and Zippy, Ross? What was your payoff? Or is this simply just something for physicists who are passionate about art or in public engagement?
I would say that, participating in art isn't going to help you finish that paper faster or improve your statistical analysis of the experiment you're working on. But definitely for me personally, I got a lot of pleasure out of working with Chris and getting to kind of express that creative side sort of independently of all these constraints that are present when I'm doing science. And I think more in like a personal, detached sense, how I conceptualize the work that I do and the way that I fit into a broader picture with that scientific work is my takeaway. So like, I work in eternal inflation, which deals with aspects of the universe that are, for the most part, beyond what we can observe. So we take what we can observe and we develop a theory to explain those observations, and then that theory also comes with some other predictions that correlate with data that we can never have access to. And that's basically eternal inflation. So at the end of the day, we're not going to have some, amazing cute device that's going to come out of my work, like what might come out of, research on graphene or something. But I think working with art where the point is to kind of put an idea out there for people to take away their own kind of personal meaning from and have a way to engage publicly in that space, kind of put my research into that perspective, and sort of highlighted the fact that we're just sort of interested in these ideas for their own sake and how they put our human experience into context. And yeah, I guess that's my thoughts on that matter.
Hello. Okay. So yeah, for me it's been a kind of a realization that there's been this muscle in a sense that I haven't been exercising, which is that of following your intuition and immediately applying. That is something that initially attracted me a lot to physics because, when we're in school, we get homework sets and we're able to do this very often, very quick. Like we have homework and we have an intuition of how to approach a problem and we solve it, and we get this reward immediately. You get your homework back, you get a good grade, and in the exam similarly. But now, as we progress into science, like I work in experiments, and in particularly the experiments I do it's a very slow-moving process. Sometimes you have an idea on how to approach an experiment or how to solve a problem, and it might take 3-4 days up to a week before you see a result. And so in that sense, it's I feel like that muscle that is like applying your intuition and following it through, in a sense for me, I feel like it has been kind of a process of punishment, in the sense that I was a little bit afraid and hesitant to use my intuition and apply it, and over time I felt that it just degraded. It was simply like a muscle you don't use over time. And I mean, this collaboration has kind of opened that to me again, and has allowed me to realize that we can, in a sense, create like a shortcut where we can apply our intuition, create something like art, and not have to think about whether we're right or not. Because at the end, we created something and we followed, some intuitive feeling that we had at the moment, and I guess the explanation follows what we did. Whereas usually in science, is we put forth an idea and we try to explain it, and if it's right, or if it's right, then we get rewarded, but if it's wrong, then we might have wasted a whole week and wasted some resources in the lab. So in that sense, I feel like this has opened up my mind to find other avenues in which I can use my intuition and just do things a bit more irrationally, I guess, but in a sense, and also at the same time get rewarded without fears of being punished.
Should I say something too? Well, besides making one of my best friends out of this, something I've been thinking a lot about is I'm asked all the time things like about symmetry breaking, about particles in the universe, about mathematics and things. But one of the beautiful things I got out of this project was being asked maybe 1 million times why physics? That's a question I hear all the time. And it's one that maybe a lot of physicists don't forget and overlook. And it's really good to be able to describe your research to people who don't have a background and be able to say, like, what do we really care about how do we see this in our everyday life? And who cares if they're not already invested in physics? So it kind of brings it home and brings it to the people. That was good for me to think about.
Any of the artists like to respond?
When you said when you do an experiment that you might have, gotten it wrong and wasted resources. And one of the things that I wrestle with a lot is the language around right and wrong in experimentation, and that goes for artists as well, because when we're learning how to do what we do, especially something technical like glass, if I don't know every mistake, if I haven't made every mistake over and over and over and figured out finally how to not make that mistake, I haven't learned anything. So the language, but the thing is that's the process of learning. It's not a mistake to make a mistake. Which is not like saying truth isn't truth. But in other words, because a thing that may be wrong in this context might actually lead to, might be right in another context. I've had situations where a piece was not going where it was supposed to go. And I remember quite vividly one piece where I was trying to make a cup and it didn't work, and in the process of this piece just not working at all was the solution to another problem entirely unrelated to a different piece, and I'd been looking for that solution for 2 years. And so there was my solution, because I was open to looking at it as it was instead of what it was supposed to be. But anyway, this process of learning, we just have a really bad language around it, because it's like you have to learn what not to do in order to know what to do. And you can't get to knowing what's correct unless you've been into the incorrect territory. So.
Excellent. That's okay.
More questions?
Second that.
You second that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I could say something to that. If you look at the history of physics, mistakes are where all of our breakthroughs come, I think.
Right.
And for example, there's matter and antimatter in the universe. We found dark matter.
Yes, questions from the audience. I saw my hand in the middle over here. Sir, would you like to stand up?
So I'm not a physicist or an artist, so I'm kind of nervous about asking this question. But I'm curious, do you think that elegance of a scientific explanation is art?
I have a whole rap about that. I have a whole rap about that. So that was the question that I submitted a question on top of the ones that she gave us, and the question that I submitted was, I don't know how I phrased it as a question, but my contention, I'll just put it that way, my contention is that science, the process of scientific discovery and the process of doing art are the same kind of thinking, right? It's the same mental process. Now, we don't use the scientific method exactly, because we don't have to. We don't have to be rigorous in our documentation, although in some cases it's a good idea to be. And then you might also say we don't have peer review, but we do. When we go into a gallery or go to sell something, we get reviewed. Do we sell stuff or do we not sell stuff? Do people like it? Do people not like it? But what I'm getting at is the act of creativity and the process of discovery, I think, are, in many cases, the identical thought process. You have to kind of reach past what you know, where you'll get inspired by something and you'll explore something. You don't necessarily, and a lot of times you don't end up where you thought you were going to go. So you'll have an idea and you'll say, I want to make this thing, and you'll go down that direction, and you discover, well, I can't get there from here, but I can get here. And that's okay too, because you wind up with something really nice. So, and I think the same thing happens in scientific discovery. Of course, I'm not a scientist, but, I would assume that I'm correct.
I don't know. It seems so to me. What I'm hearing up here is really interesting in that, as an artist, I'll sit down and I have an idea, especially with Arturo here, and I see something in my mind, and I'm like, okay, this is how I want to describe this. This is how I want to visualize it. And yet, in getting there, it seldom happens the way I foresaw it, and it does. It kind of takes a turn here and a turn there, or it just gets completely wiped out and started over. But in doing that, I feel like the outcome is much richer, and it's much more interesting, and it tells a story that you got to somehow, that you didn't pre-conceptualize, but you found your way there, and it was the truth, and it turned out to be, a really good way to describe, for instance, Arturo's work here. And so that was really interesting to me, and now I'm hearing these physicists talk like, when they get to that spot, maybe it was just accidental, or they kind of found their way, but that's where the good stuff was.
It's like sometimes you have to let the process lead you to where you're going to go. I mean, even though you might have started out trying to get somewhere, sometimes the process sort of takes over, and so there is the process of discovery, and I would assume science goes through the same kind of paroxysms sometimes.
Yeah, you used the word elegance, which I think implies the connection between multiple disciplines, and in our case, physics and art. Physics by itself maybe isn't elegant if you don't see the artistic beauty in it, and art by itself maybe isn't elegant if you don't realize that it has some connection to our world. I think that to see them both is essential.
That was another thing that happened to me, was the connection to our world. I know in my write-up, Arturo was studying graphene, and when that door got opened, that graphene was my pencil I'd been drawing with my whole life, but now it's this revolutionary thing that does all these, I'll let Arturo explain what it does, because he's better at that than me. But ever since that happened, I walk around and I'm going, what's that going to be? What's it going to do? What's that turning into? How does that work? Like, it just opened this excitement and made me realize that I've been living my entire life surrounded by physics and never really thought about it like that. That physics was this incredibly interesting, rich thing that became very personal, and now I look at everybody who doesn't understand this and I kind of feel a little bit sorry for them. they should talk to physicists. Tell me about graphene and things.
Before I get to that, I guess, I want to, just to follow up on the question of elegance in physics. I guess for me, in terms of doing experiments, elegance comes in the way of finding an explanation that is the simplest, that is the cleanest, that when you get this bunch of data, when you see a bunch of curves and you're trying to figure out what is going on, if you might start out with a clumsy idea of how what you're observing can be explained. But then as we get more data, we start morphing our idea and it starts becoming distilled into something that can be simple, where not many gears are turning, but at the same time can explain everything you see. So that's one of the things that attracted me to the work that Anna was doing, is in that it was simple. The pieces were very clean and simple, and yet they evoked an idea. And one of the pieces that we have that is supposed to represent the microscope that I used, it started off as being a little bit complex, that we were thinking we might use some metal parts, but ended up just boiling down to this sphere and just some lines of wire underneath, and that's something that attracted me initially, and this is one of my favorite pieces, that we worked on. So, in that regard to elegance and physics and art, I guess that is the connection, boiling things down to the most simplest explanation, and that is usually what's taken to be the leading theory, when, I guess in a certain period of time. And then you want me to explain a bit about?
I would love to hear a little bit. You guys should hear a little bit about a scanning chemical microscope with graphene.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the work I do is like I said, for experimental condensed matter. So condensed matter meaning that I look at solid materials in the solid form, and specifically I look at graphene. This atomically clean sheet of carbon that has a hexagonal pattern, much like honeycomb from bees. And I use a microscope. In this sense, it's not a microscope in the conventional sense that you can look through a lens and see very small features, but in this case, this is a very sharp tip, an atomically sharp tip that we bring close to the surface, in this case of graphene, and it kind of acts like a vacuum cleaner. Like we pick up electrons as we go across, so we're able to map the surfaces of this material, but at the same time, since we're vacuuming around electrons, we can analyze like how electrons are behaving, are swimming around this ocean of graphene. And the reason why I mentioned that I work on artificial atoms is because we are able to create, like for example, corals or pools of electrons. And once we confine them in this little corral, they behave in different ways than we expect. And that is depending on the geometry of this little pool that we create. So that's something I studied. Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of elegance and physical theories, and spend a lot of energy trying to take the facts that I've learned in all of my courses and fit them into a more elegant picture just for my own sake. And when I think of elegance in art or in nature, it's often like the sense that all of the components or elements of a piece kind of flow together naturally in a way that like one sort of implies the next. So if you kind of imagine an elegant dance form, it's one where each movement sort of seems to follow as a matter of course from the last, and kind of makes this unity that just kind of makes sense through and through. But in terms of comparing it to art generally, for me, elegance tends to close off options for interpretation at the same time as it kind of opens up new avenues of inquiry. So like when electricity and magnetism were unified in this very elegant framework where these two different fields can transform into one another, and we can relate all of these different phenomena in different frames of reference, in different ways of viewing the experiment. It sort of closed off a lot of ways to interpret these two different classes of phenomena, while at the same time making it kind of unified into this one picture that everything sort of made sense and followed as a matter of course from the other facts in the theory. And then it led to more discoveries. So in the sense that I feel like with art, you can kind of approach a piece from your own vantage point and take away whatever it is that you take away from it. And kind of, like seeing an art piece is sort of an opening up process, whereas this elegance is more of a closing off process. But yeah, just some rambling thoughts on that.
You know, when you, well, in my discipline, particularly when I'm sculpting, but if I'm making a thing, I was struck by your talk of elegance, because when I start making a thing, I usually have many steps I go through, and it doesn't all necessarily I often get to where I want to be, but it's difficult. And then as I do more iterations of a piece, I will trim back the movement. So, because what I do is very physical, and I will streamline, and I'll get my timing better, and I'll take the order of operations and change the order of operations. And eventually, if I do it enough, then the process itself becomes one of elegance, and usually that is reflected in the piece. So that the piece I first started making is usually a little more complicated and overly complicated for what, to convey whatever I'm trying to convey. I don't know if that makes sense, but like we did this series of bulls, a friend of mine, and we put a bull head on the bull. We made the body, and then we put the head on. We did all the fiddly bits and the horns and all that kind of stuff. And then it sat there, and it was, when we were done, and it was basically a bowl. And it was kind of cool, but it didn't really say anything. That's what it said. It said a bowl, and there was nothing else. And so what I did is I ripped the head off, and I just left a jagged hole where the head was, and not on that piece, but on successive pieces. And then, through iteration, got better and better at making the body and abstracting it and kind of pulling its essence out as opposed to just trying to make an anatomical model of a bull. And so then you have this thing that is really evocative, and I've had people not even realize there was no head on it because they filled it in their mind until I said, oh yeah, there's no head, and they go, oh yeah, there's no head. So it's really interesting because but elegance isn't arrived at, is essential to what you're doing and what is not essential to what you're doing. Oh, this is extraneous. I can just pull this out, leave that behind, and leave just the stuff that matters. Yeah.
I could speak just one. I could speak one thing to that, and Zippy's explanations of the science, to me, like the elegance was in that meeting point when there was finally a translation and finally a dance between the information that he was coming from in his head to, like, I don't speak that language, so so in that meeting point, that was the elegance to me, and I could see how that could be translated in a lot of different subjects.
Okay, next question.
Can I say one more thing about this? Well, you asked about string theory, and I'm sure you may have heard that a hot topic in physics right now is a unified theory, or what we call a theory of everything. This is exactly the question of elegance, and a theoretical physicist is really trying just to make what we already know more elegant. That's literally all we're trying to do. And we're trying to use fancy math to show it. So we use the word symmetry a lot. We're looking for symmetries of the universe. We're looking for a way to explain what we see more elegantly. So we already have experiments that tell us all kinds of stuff, all kinds of data. We know the numbers to some high precision. But why? Why are these numbers what they are? And how do you explain them to people? How do you use math to explain them? How do you reason? What's the elegant underlying theory? So we're trying to unite pieces of physics into one theory that's more elegant than the rest. That's what we're after.
Is the answer 42?
You just wait. There's a question there.
Question in the back. Yes.
I was just hearing as you were all talking about this toward the end, the word understanding is coming to mind. Elegance has some form of understanding. Communication becomes clear. There's an understanding between the artist and the physicist. It appears as a work of art in this case.
Indeed.
Sounds like you'd like to hear more about this, the connection, the understanding, the communication, and how it takes place. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm not asking anything at all from the observation.
Oh, okay.
It's a good observation.
Yeah.
So as a physicist, digging deep into my work, I sometimes feel my field of vision narrowing and not always in a good way. I worry sometimes that extreme focus stifles my creative side. Panelists, do you ever worry that you're in danger of losing the bigger picture? Physicists, do you, in your experiences working with your artists, did you ever leave the studio and have a fresh outlook on a naughty experiment? Or maybe realize, oh, I hadn't thought of it in that way before. And similarly, artists, did you have a breakthrough? Or did you unlock new ideas? Did the art or science help you stay on track? Was it energizing to have a peek into a different world and recharge your batteries? Did you find inspiration and come up with new approaches? So questions for both artists and physicists. I would love to hear from our panelists. I would also love to hear from Randy Silverstein, a artist in the audience who I think could speak to this as well.
So yeah, this relates back to what I said first about this intuition and creativity muscle that needs to be exercised. In particular, in the work that I do, I often get caught up in everyday things. Like actually right after this, I need to go back to the lab and I refill liquids into our machine just to keep it running. It's like a big monster that constantly needs food to keep running. So, yeah. So, it's so many everyday things that we need to take into account. We need to, buy some materials to keep things running. We need to, the program crashes, so it's running slow. We need to fix that up, and it was until I had to explain, I guess, my work to Tana and put it into this triptych when I was able to step back and see the big picture a little bit clearer, because we had to put in perspective of the material that I'm studying, the tool that I'm using, but also the impact to society. And explaining this to Tana was very helpful, because it was like a constant feedback, because she had to understand what I was trying to explain in order to make it into art. So it was this process of going back and forth was very helpful in allowing me to achieve or to build a language that I hadn't built before, because going every day into the lab and talking to your coworkers, to your lab mates, you build this lingo, and that's what's ingrained in your mind. So me going outside in the world and trying to communicate with you what my research is about, it can be a little bit hard for me. It might sound like I'm speaking a completely different language. So that, in that regard, that was helpful to talk to Tana. And I mean, one of the coolest things too was I was able to talk to my parents a bit more easily about what I do. Because usually, when I go see them, I would have relatives over and they were like, oh, he does physics. And immediately they picture me as Albert Einstein on a board, just writing like crazy. But when I bring him over to the lab now, they can see that it's a completely different reality. And it's cool that I was able to translate. And a lot of the skills I actually learned from my dad. Growing up with him, actually, we did a lot of plumbing together. So what I do now is kind of like a glorified plumbing job, So I'm often throughout the day, I'm just tightening wrenches, connecting wires. So it is cool, and being able to communicate that to my family and to the community in general, it's pretty amazing.
And I always gave him wine. This was an interesting project for me. After doing graphic design my whole life, and people come to me with their projects or their problems, and it needed to be put out there as clearly as possible. So I had to I kept going back and forth between creating something you would put in a brochure to get people to study the scanning tunneling microscope and graphene at the university, or something to hang on the wall. And I very recently started painting, and that was not working at all. Sarah, my hat is so off to you. Amazing. Couldn't do it. So yeah, I struggled. I struggled really hard to get our turtle's work across and make it as clear as possible and still feel like it was fine art. And I don't know if I succeeded. I'm still just kind of go, I was happy enough to just put it on the wall. But yeah, really difficult project, but completely compelling and amazing. It was very gratifying. And I got to meet this guy.
Well, one truth about physics too is you gotta apply for funding often, and that means you have to be able to pitch your ideas in a sexy way maybe, and in an appealing manner. And so one thing I gained from this project was a reflection on my work, not as a scientific career, but as a lifestyle, and I think there's a lot of stereotypes that physicists have And this is a project that breaks some of those barriers down to the community. We are people who do what we do because when we were little, we liked building things out of blocks. We liked to look at the sun and wonder why that makes plants grow. We asked all the same questions as you. We just went about them we made it our career study instead of just a hobby or, so I think we're more relatable than people think.
Sorry, I just went blank. Anyway, when Zippy and I met and talked about all these, what we were going to do, and it was a challenge to. There were the two angles you could go about it, as to just illustrate his concepts and ideas, but that didn't seem appealing to me. And so what my art always has come from is this major inner heart and, very personal experience. And so, but a lot of times I feel like, well, why am I doing this? Is this just for my own indulgent expression of my little life? But then when I do speak about my work to other people, I do see that it's like, oh, you think that too. You have that same experience. So it feels a little more worth it to be an artist and to do what I do. And then this experiment with Zippy, with this collaboration, it was a big challenge to go into that other side of my brain that I know works, and and really find reasons, or find the explanations that serve the other part, and then put that out there to connect to different types of minds and people, not just the emotional, beautiful, lovey people that I tend to talk about my art. I don't know. So it was a good challenge to reach a different community. And actually, even in my first Friday openings, and when people have come in my studio, and I was working on the piece, and I was trying to explain it and the process, and it was really fun to connect with a lot more engineered type minds. And it's like, oh, finally, these men that are usually sitting outside waiting for their wives, they're engaged, and I was having a really great time. And then, yeah, there was a beautiful relationship there, so. I'm sad to say that the men got interested in my wives. And that reminds me of very quick story. During my open studios this last October, a woman and her husband came into my open studios, and like Arturo, the work I've been doing that year was very particular and exacting, and it very much attracted the science world or architects, physicists. It's just the way what it was doing. So this woman and her husband approached him, proceeded to tell her about my physicist, that I thought I got the best one because I get to study this scanning tunnel microscope. And when I said that word, she kind of lit up. And I said, you know a lot about a scanning tunnel microscope. And she went to her car and she brought me her card, and she had just retired. She had been working for IBM as a research scientist and had been in Zurich working with the two doctors who won the Nobel Prize in 1984 for the scanning tunnel microscope. So let's hear it for the ladies.
Yeah, so doing theory work is kind of a double-edged sword in the sense that you don't need a lab, so you don't need to, go fill up some fluid that needs to be put in the machine to make it run. But you also have your workspace with you all the time. So, if I'm on a bus or at home with my family, I can always be kind of chugging along with this problem that's been bugging me in the background, and maybe not totally engaged with what I'm doing at the moment. So I found that this project especially kind of reminded me that contrary to kind of the ethos of being a young graduate student, like your research in advancing the tiny corner of this sub-subfield in the broader physics landscape is not your entire existence, and there's a whole constellation of activities that go along with not just being a physics grad student, but being a human. And one of those activities can be making awesome pieces of art and collaborating with great people. Yeah, and also like being mindful of when I'm sort of not engaging fully with my environment and not doing so in a way that's really advancing my productivity at work either, and just kind of being able to step back and let those ideas kind of come without needing to be tended all the time, with regards to that constant focus.
Yeah, this issue of gender just came up, so I should speak to that a little bit. And that physics and computer science are the two lowest male to female ratio. And as graduate students, we often have incoming graduate student populations that we're trying to bring to Santa Cruz. Obviously, we want the best students we can get. And it's been a long-standing problem trying to get more women in physics. And so one of my motivations for this project was to see what it's like in the art community. Why is it more even ratio, and maybe apply some of that to our physics community.
Nice.
Good idea.
What a great idea.
So I had a breakthrough when you asked about that. I normally work in scads of color, and that's what I pride myself on. So my initial thought, and I had lots of different approaches after talking to Ross, who still hasn't explained adequately to me what a virtual particle is. That's the first question I asked him. Anyway, very disappointed. So normally, my first thoughts were, I do these kind of wild abstract scapes of color, and they look sort of cosmic anyway. So it really would have been very easy to go in that direction, to just paint, as it were, with glass, something that was representational of like really cool visuals. But I really wanted to do. I love physics. I wish I had been able to be a physicist. Didn't work out in my life, and I wanted to do something that was truly collaborative. And so I didn't have a clue what that would be, and so we just started talking, and we met 6 times or something, and we really didn't do any art. My furnace was down, my shop was out of commission, the whole thing, so it was quite some time before we actually got to doing any art, but we kept meeting nonetheless. And finally he expressed to me that he saw his work, the way he visualized it was intention, and and that was the key to opening the door to a whole new way of doing art with glass. I don't think what I did has ever been done before anywhere, and that is to make art using tension in glass. So essentially it's easy to make tension on the outside of a piece of glass because you just chill it, and because glass cools but doesn't transmit heat very well, the outside will cool faster than the inside. Therefore, and because glass shrinks when it cools, it will start to shrink around a core that is not shrinking, and so you build up tension, and thus the glass is pulling against itself in every direction as it shrinks, and eventually it'll fracture. But that's also how they make safety glass, right? So safety glass is stressed in that way, by cooling abruptly and then slowing that cooling rate down so that the thing is carrying a bunch of tension, and when you break it, instead of breaking into long knife edges, it turns into little chips because you release all that tension. But the trick with this project was to take the tension and put it inside the glass, not outside the glass. And so that was really quite a challenge. And so we did it in 2 different ways. We used heat by shrinking the core piece that we made, in the geometric shape that physicists use for mapping the early stages of the universe, we took that geometry, we made it into a solid piece of glass, and then we chilled it so that it was cold and contracted, and then we gathered over it with hot glass and shaped it up real quick and put it away. And then the glass on the outside is relaxed and soft, but the glass on the inside is, hopefully tightened up. And we did it another way as well by cooking up a pot of glass of a different formula that shrinks a little bit more, because different glasses shrink at different rates. But anyway, we ran some experiments. We had a couple of explosions. We had a couple pieces blow up on us because we pushed it.
Our fingers.
Yeah, well, we used this. Here's the thing. We used the scientific process and light, physics, to actually make our piece in a totally unique way. Like I say, I don't think anybody's ever made glass, or art out of stress. So instead of putting color on the piece, I made the color generate the piece. Or, excuse me, I made the piece generate the color, right? So I made the and I've never really been a fan of working in clear. It's always been boring to me. I love color. But in this case, I took all the color away and made the glass produce the color. That to me is like really awesome. So.
It was pretty awesome. Yeah.
Question?
I'd like to hear from Randy about her.
Yeah, I was.
Randy, come on up and you can use the mic.
We're the big boys now. Well, it's interesting. I had so many thoughts about the idea of elegance and my project because, the first thing I asked my scientist, who's not here, Alex couldn't make it, but I said, I did it in the kind of opposite way. I didn't really invite him into my studio right away. I said, can I go up to the university and look through the telescope? And I had been doing work that was very cosmically themed at the time. And he said, no, I don't look through telescopes. And I said, what? You're an astrophysicist. What do you mean you don't look through telescopes? So that really kind of blew my mind. Okay? And I had to figure out a way, and Alex is much younger than I am, and it was like, how am I going to relate to this guy? So it turns out, funnily enough, that he actually, let me see if I get this right, he writes programs on his computer that analyzes the data that comes from the satellite telescopes that take pictures of the universe that don't have the kind of light that exists on our planet. So, and am I getting this right?
Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It works.
And so I thought, okay, well, what Alex is doing is he's looking for dark matter in the Andromeda galaxy, which is our closest galaxy to the Earth. And so what we started talking about, I started off as an artist, but then I went back to school and I learned how to do web design and writing my own programs in HTML and PHP and things like that. So what we had in common was actually that we both were looking for elegant solutions. And so this was our common ground. And so my first blog, that's what I wrote about, was finding elegant solutions, because I had experienced it in writing my own programs to put things on the internet, but he was doing it at a much different level, but we really had that in common. So the next thing I did was say, okay, well, how next are we we're not working on the computer together, we're working in the studio, so I invited him into my studio, and he made such a beautiful piece. He made so many beautiful pieces, and then later on, I needed like lots of little stringer parts to make my discs, a lot of little stringer parts, and so I invited him into my studio to work with me and make the little stringers that I used in my discs. And it was through working together over the table in the studio that we had these conversations where I learned more about his science. It wasn't like, it was casual, and it was sweet. It turned out to be a really sweet relationship because we were able to sit in the same space at the same time and create together. And so that line, that distinction between art and science really kind of melted away because we were both looking for elegant solutions. And I loved it. I loved every minute. I'm so sorry he's not here to tell his part of the story, but I really enjoyed it. And then through that, I also had a breakthrough.
Oh, cool.
And I started using my materials in ways that I hadn't ever really thought to use them before, which is very similar to Chris, who's doing glass also.
You know, one thing I didn't mention was that Ross helped me make every single piece that's over there. I brought Ross into the hot shop, and he was actively making, hands-on, working on the pieces, which I thought was just fabulous. You know, I'd much rather that than be going off somewhere, making the piece, come back and say, "How's this work for you?" You know, that was, and I'm glad to hear that you did that as well.
I was really interested to hear about your project the day that we were in here setting up, because that was exciting to me too, that you guys worked together in your studio like that.
That was
creating just that.
That was part of the joy of it. I mean, I really think that forming the partnership for me was one of the most exciting things. You know. To get to know Ross and to work actively together.
Yes, this is what we're doing. We're working really hard. And he's a physicist and I'm an artist, but it's completely overlapping. It's really amazing. Randy.
I'm dying here. So I almost see, it used to be more together and it's gone separate. So like Leonardo da Vinci, you know? And so I think at the time the world, when we were starting to have consciousness about stuff we couldn't see or stuff we didn't know about, it was easier for the artist and the scientist to be more connected because we were both looking for the truth or something we couldn't see that we might know. You know, we look up at the stars and we know there's stars and we don't know what they are. So I just see it as culturally we've kind of separated, but initially we were more alike.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like when I'm listening to music, like I'm in contact with some talent that the musician has to sort of invoke emotions in the listener without articulating anything or like without me being able to pick apart what it is about the music that's doing that. And I feel like as the physicists are uncovering these truths or these new interpretations that make the physics and the data that we've had access to for decades more elegant and kind of concretize that picture of the universe that we have, I think there's definitely a role for artists to kind of communicate that to a broader audience in a way that like maybe they wouldn't be able to articulate fully, but would get the point across that is what we experience when we're studying what we're studying. Like, I couldn't, you know, really explain what some of the work that I do is or why it's significant without going through the full explanation of all these courses and all these mathematical explanations for phenomena, but the same feeling that I get when I am really satisfied with a mathematical result that kind of unifies these different concepts that I've been thinking about can be gotten through other means and sort of communicated to someone who doesn't have that same experience.
Are you saying that the excitement that we experienced when we were first pulling the pieces out of the annealer and looking to see, did we get a glow? Do we have some color here? Is that the same kind of excitement that you get when an experiment comes off properly or a course, you know?
Yeah, I think it's really similar because like you have an idea and you need to test kind of the deeper down consequences of that idea in the mathematics. And so like there's a process of starting with a concept and working it through and like gathering over it and all of these analogous steps, and then you finally take it out of the annealer and it's like, oh, it cracked, it exploded, or we didn't get the effect that we wanted. It's not as beautiful as was intended, so you kind of iterate and try again with a different framework. And I think that reaction when it comes out well and you know that you've made progress toward this thing that you're trying to create is analogous, and yeah.
That's nice. We didn't really talk about that, the similarity of feeling with regards to this, but I, that was also my kind of thought about, that the act of sciencing is the same as arting, I mean, we're both, exploring, and then there's that anticipation to work, and, and sometimes, we put a lot of work into this project. Yeah, so it was a lot of hours, but anyway, it was really a lot of fun though.
Yeah, I just wanted to share one anecdote to tie up to this question of how art and physics can come together. So just last week I was at a conference in Boston, and the days leading up to traveling, we have to prepare presentations that we're going to take with us, and we would have to make this quick 10-minute presentation to this room full of people. So anyways, one of the ways that I can use my artistic skills, I guess, is making these PowerPoint presentations. And I am inspired by the work that Hannah does, and how she uses this very small number of pieces, and she arranges them in a way that it evokes an idea, and you can immediately see, like, one of the paintings you have in your living room is just this like 2 lines of paper with 1 line going vertical. And she asked me, why do you see it? And I said, it looks like a boat in the ocean. And it's exactly what she was going for. So this sort of idea is pretty cool. And I used a similar methodology in my approach to making these slides. I had one slide where I had very simple graphics, and it was all just copy and paste. Copy and paste to make an explanation, an intuitive explanation of the physics that I was trying to present. And probably 3 days before flying to Boston, I presented this in a group meeting. And immediately, I had my advisor and my lab mates started seeing things that we hadn't seen before in the data. Just because we had this graphic that boiled down the essence of what the data was meant to explain. And anyways, to the days leading up to my presentation, we had to reshuffle our explanation and our understanding so much, but we ended up at the very last minute with a very beautiful explanation for this. And this is a project now that is, it might be exciting, it might lead to something else. And I mean, that is a way of how like trying to find simplicity in art led to actually a scientific advancement, possibly soon to come out.
Cool.
There's a lot of questions. I think we should listen to the audience more now. This man's been waiting for a long time.
I spent the last 25 or 30 years working with scientists and engineers in a research environment, and the last 30 or 40 years living with artists. And one thing that I observed with the scientists is that it appeared as though they would often become so trapped in their jargon and vernacular concepts, and as you described it, this one little micro place of a sub-topic of, and became difficult to explain even to people in an adjacent field what was going on. And this is a wonderful project. It's part of what brought me here. So I'm curious about the origins of this, and also where do you see it going from here?
That's Stephanie.
That would be you, yeah.
Oh gosh. So it was, it's not an original idea. This sort of collaboration is taking place in many places throughout the country, many cities. I thought Santa Cruz in particular was the perfect and excellent choice to do this activity, namely because of the thriving artistic community that we have here. And again, UC Santa Cruz, of course. Also, although I'm not a researcher anymore, I teach a lot of physics, introductory physics to life science majors. And most of my students, the majority of my students, do not want to take physics. They come into it already hating the subject, fearing it, dreading it, and I've been striving for ways to reach these students and to make the subject more approachable and less intimidating and more accessible. And so I've been bringing in humanities, arts, crafts, design, and music into the physics curriculum. And I wanted to, that's been happening in my classroom at an undergrad level, but I wanted the grad students in our department to experience that as well. So that was my goal in setting this collaboration up. You asked, where does this go from here? And that was actually a question I wanted to pose to the panelists and to the audience. In particular, let's see, in this day and age especially, we see the implications of research findings that they need to be connected to broader audiences. We as physicists need to be able to communicate our science to the public, to the voting public. We need to be able to explain global warming, for example. It's critical that we not only do our work and can talk about our work with fellow physicists, but with the general public. And I think we can all agree that visible art was successful in that sense. Our physicists, our participating physicists, were able to work with our artists to convey their work and the importance of their work through visual art. I'm wondering what other fields we can do this in. My thoughts, immediate thoughts now are, let's bring in dancers and have them interpret Ross's work, and musicians and have them create a song about Arturo's tunneling microscope. And we could, people could write poetry, and we could make film and animations, and I see it as a growing progression. And so I'm curious what thoughts you have and what you might like to see in the near future. Yeah.
I just wanted to share my takeaway is that from this project is I've just been so impressed with the communication skills of the physics students. Like every time I talk to them, they were able to, explain to, a history major what they were talking about, and I'm just so impressed. Kudos to you and to the UCSC community, because I think they really fostered that.
One thing I want to say, and then I'll hand it over to Randy and Zippy as well. We have this wonderful person, Christoph, who's taping this for us today. Randy has been really helpful with her beautiful camera. We're putting a website up that will have all of the images here from the art side. I'm going to take all of the copy that went with it that was written for the different projects from the perspective of the physicist and the artist that will be on this website. And my hope is that it can grow and people can look at it online, people can add to it. Other people can, as you said, if they want to develop things around dance or poetry or music, and maybe have like a little starting off point where people can look at this and be inspired by it and come up with their own things around education and around art and have this grow in that way as a designer. Just let it grow.
So I'm an artist and I live in multiple places, one of them is Santa Cruz. I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and I totally hear you about influencing the voters and education is such a key. Meanwhile, just over the hill, there's tremendous global and monetary financial influence. if you could, as artists and physicists, influence the influencers, you might be able to move mountains. So I just want to leave that.
They are being influenced, they just don't know it.
I just want to say that I think these panel discussions are a really critical piece of the project, that people can come and listen to you speak to each other and to us, and so I hope that that will continue to be a part of these projects, including influencing the influencers.
Thank you. So I'm a little self-serving here. First of all, I want to do this again. Because
Yeah.
I think it would be a different experience
Me too.
with any other physicist. Okay?
Right, so additionally, I think we should open it up to other STEM disciplines.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
this was physics only, but I can imagine many other fields.
And then the other thing is, you really want to take physics now.
Come on in. She's a lady. That was interesting. What your thoughts were.
Oh, so you asked this question about how do you explain something that has a lot of jargon to somebody who doesn't know that jargon. There's a game where you hold your phone up and it says some animal and you have to guess the animal. I don't remember what it's called, but this is the game that we're all familiar, in our professional lives, we're all familiar with. You have to tell your family, you have to tell somebody. But I overheard on campus that Stephanie was trying to teach the electric field to her incoming students. So she said, well, it's like perfume, or it's like something that you can feel, something relatable. And I think analogy is our biggest tool, and there are some really fun quotes by famous physicists using analogy.
One of the tools I used was YouTube to translate what, we would talk about something and then I'd go look it up. And then I'd find some YouTube videos that really broke it down. And so that in itself is art, and using all the different components. So that was kind of fascinating. That was in the process of doing this, I was actually using the science and art collaboratively. But and just a thought about where is this going? It really brought home the fact that, in order for people to want to learn about something, they have to care about it within their own life, and they have to have something affecting them. So that connection, that relationship, the communication is to start to develop those skills more in our education system, perhaps. I think that is one of the tools that could be developed a little bit more, because that puts together. I see it in the medical system, integrative medicine, and we have the human that's suffering, and then we have the doctor that just putting all those things together, and how all of the systems work together, our emotional bodies, our spiritual bodies, our physical. So I don't know where that's going, but
if we knew, it wouldn't be so exciting.
Anyway, that's all I would say. Anyone else?
I was thinking when we were talking about that, there has to be the interest, and sometimes I get a little despairing because you see so many people that are disinterested. But on the other hand, I was listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson not too long ago talking about how excited everybody gets, about science. Some people really do want to know, so there is an appetite out there, which we just need to draw more of those people in, I think. I mean, I wouldn't know how to do it, but I'd love to have more influence on the influencers. I have no idea how to do that, but
Thinking about it,
well, and it would be nice to get some of the money from Silicon Valley, or there's a lot of grant stuff. I'm not talking about money for myself to buy a fancy car with. I'm talking about money to do projects with, or whatever, to
Move this agenda.
yeah, move it along, yeah. But your use of YouTube, I did the same thing. In fact, one night I had just watched an Royal Academy on quantum fields, right? And apparently it had just been released, and like the next day, Ross and I were talking. I was telling him, "Oh yeah, I saw this, YouTube video about RA, about these quantum fields," and he'd watched it the same night I had. It came out, and we both watched it. That was really cool. So, but I don't know. I'd like to see. I'd love to do this again. I'd like to see, like you said, other STEM fields would be really cool. But I don't know. I'd like to see it get bigger, but I guess, this is the first time we've done this here. Well, thank you. This has just been a blast. Like my own captive physicist, I get to, I tell you, because it's on that little thing over there, but every time, like at an RA lecture, somebody will lecture on quantum fields, and then they'll get a question from the audience, and they'll give you a couple of minutes of explanation, and then when I'm listening, of course, I have another 2 or 3 questions that occur. Then you ask, then they answer that question, and they answer that question, and they answer that question, and it's like, follow-up questions. It leaves me very frustrated. So it has been an absolute pleasure to be able to say in the course of the conversation, what about this? And then, okay, yeah, well, what about that? And I can keep questioning until I get to the point where I am either exhausted or I have some glimmer of understanding, and that has been one of the deep pleasures of this thing for me. Anyway.
1-800, call your own physicist.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. We have our hotline will answer any of your physics questions if you're in need.
And regarding where we go from here, we've already done another batch of experiments since the opening of this exhibit, so we're definitely interested in doing more and seeing if we can perfect this process and what else.
Yeah, what we did, like what did you call it? You said you felt like we were at the point of the peer review, or what was it? Because what we did just is not the final product,
Yeah, so graduate students go through this process of basically review by the department. So you take your courses, and then there's an advancement to candidacy where you go from being a PhD student to a PhD candidate. And that's kind of where you, at least in our department, you present your proposal for research and what you've done so far, and convince a jury of professors that you're capable of completing on time and adding to the research base. So this was kind of like our advancement to candidacy. We proved this concept and demonstrated that there's something of value here, but it's not the dissertation defense, which is kind of the end goal of...
We call that a masterpiece in the arts. Right, and okay, so, there's some, and I'm using that in a technical way, because we say, oh, that's a masterpiece, But really, what a masterpiece is that an apprentice goes through a long apprenticeship, sometimes 20 years, and then makes a piece that demonstrates to his peers or to his masters that all of the ability and skill that he's developed over the years. And that is the masterpiece. It's the piece that advances you to mastery. Yeah. So it's not just a generic term. It actually means something in the art world. And so, we're kind of, I'd like to develop this further. I'd like to see what I can do with it. I think it's really cool. I have no idea how I'm going to sell it. Huh?
So where is it?
My pocket. Oh, for me anyway. Yeah. No, it'd be great to get some funding. Yeah.
That does raise a valid point. This project is actually underfunded. We're at a deficit. Our amazing curator has volunteered her time and her talents, the videographer, a lot of the printing that we've done, assistance that we received has been provided to us. And so again, we'd be grateful for any donations to assist in that respect. But given that we have just 10 minutes left, I'd really like to open it up to the audience. If there's anything you would like to ask our panelists, any participants in particular, please feel free to do so.
I'd like someone, I can't do this, but I'd like someone to volunteer to create a funding site online so that we can go online and contribute.
All right.
If you could please just write your email back there when we get the site up and running, and we can email you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion.
So we do have a Fusion website that's online, and there is a link to a tab that says donations, and that gives you my personal email address. You can contact me, and I'm happy to discuss with you as well.
Any more questions?
No, I think we're done.
So this has been touched on in various ways already in the conversation, but I'm wondering, this is a question for both the artists and the physicists. What will change for you, or has anything changed in how you will approach your art or your science as a result of this collaboration?
Any result I ever find, I will explain to an artist and to somebody who doesn't know the lingo, and make sure I can explain it to them with them confidently grasping the concept, or else it's useless.
Zippy makes an excellent point. That's actually what I tell my students, that the best way to know that they've mastered a concept is to teach it to someone else and to have that person understand it.
So in science, there's this concept of peer review, where you think that you've discovered something or you've made some contribution, and then it gets passed around to people who are qualified to evaluate it, and they basically try and pick it apart and look for inconsistencies and look for reasons why what you did is wrong. So it's kind of a heuristic of like approaching a piece and eventually coming to the conclusion, I tried as hard as I could to hate this and I couldn't, so congratulations, you've won. And I feel like in art it's sort of a different approach of like, sometimes you can't, it doesn't fit your tastes, but that's all right. And it's kind of a different attitude. And this has come up a few times in talking with Chris, but like the idea that a piece of art or a piece of creative production that you put into the world isn't under your control once you've let it out, and it sort of has a life of its own that you can't control the destiny of. And I think I'm going to take that forward into research that I put out in the sense of not trying to control all aspects of the thought process that's going to go through the reader's mind, and just sort of present the work as I see it and let it live its own existence after that. So changing the way I approach science.
I'm going to do more art. I spend so much time feeding my hungry, angry baby, which is my hot shop, kind of like your tunneling microscope. And I get so caught up in all the little things that I have to do, and I forget to take time to just do art and do it for myself, because I do art for other people. I make lighting bells and I do things to sell and so on and so forth. And so that's kind of what I would call decorative art. But I found doing this project just got me so excited, especially to go into not an iteration of something I've done before and to develop that further, but to really just cast about it and take a leap into the unknown was so exciting and just really energized me. And I mean, why the heck am I doing art if I'm not doing that, right? I mean, if I'm not getting out there and really pushing my boundaries and stepping off a cliff, to see what's going to happen. And it also made me kind of trust myself too, because as an artist, a lot of times you go along for years and you've been working on this thing, and and it's maybe developed over the years, and now you're at a point where you've kind of got a handle on this thing that you do, and you question, or at least I do, I'm like, is that it? Am I done? Do I have any other great new ideas? Something that's, beyond, something new, that And yeah, this has happened about at least twice, but maybe 3 times. But this for sure, I mean, like to have, like in 3,000 years of glass blowing, to my knowledge, no one has ever made art out of tension in glass. I mean, that's pretty.
Breakthrough.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You know, yeah, have a question?
So I'm a public school teacher, and I'm currently trying to incorporate each part of STEM in the work of art with my 3rd grade students. Hopefully going to show up in the year. I was hoping I could borrow one of your physicists maybe for my year.
I'm sorry, ma'am, that's not up to me. Go find your own physicist. I've got one. And I'm keeping him.
I'm doing the same thing in my classroom. I've assigned my students to do a piece of their own artwork to explain through visual art difficult, abstract, or intangible concepts, and to use that to help another student understand it better.
Stephanie, do you find that people or your physicists go, "Oh, I'm not creative. I'm not an artist," you know? And I hear people say that to me all the time. I'll say I'm an artist, and they'll say, "Oh, I can't draw," and I'll say, "Neither can I." You know, that's not my medium. But one of the things that I think that I like to impress upon people when they come I do a lot of teaching. When people come to my studio, is that we are inherently a creative species. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to learn how to speak by the time we're 2 years old. I mean, we are just inherently creative creatures, and so, but we've got this idea that because we don't work in a creative field that we're no longer creative. So I try to when I talk to people, I try to break through that ossification of thought that they're like, well, I'm an accountant, I'm not creative. Well, what are you talking about? There's such a thing as creative accounting, you know? I mean, everybody's creative in their own field, usually, unless they're just brain dead. But, yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for attending and participating. I'd like to thank our panelists. All of our participating artists and physicists, thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.